record. All right. So again, I want to thank everyone for joining us here. And it felt really important. One of the things that since this COVID-19 pandemic has started, that I've been trying to keep in mind as executive director is communication throughout all this. And so obviously at the beginning, it was really important for us to communicate with our clients and to communicate with the staff. And there was a ton of questions and anxiety and chaos. And, it was a little bit of a whirlwind. And as things have kind of settled down, Nancy and I in particular have been really wanting to make sure that we're keeping everybody who has interest in what's going on in the agency up to speed. And so that's where we came up with the idea for this. Again, my name is Russell Bradbury-Carlin. I'm the executive director at Youth Services here. I've been here almost 5 years. And before I started, I thought I would kind of talk just briefly talk about my own experience, and then in some ways how that connects to what's been going on around this pandemic at Youth Services. And I have a 15-year-old son, and right now myself, my wife and him are all working remotely. He's doing remote school. My wife is a library director here in the town I live in, and she's at home too. And we've been doing this now probably as long as all of you have. I think it's just about 2 months or a little over 2 months. And it's been really interesting to watch how my 15-year-old responds to all this. I've been really impressed and pleased. He's mostly acclimated to it. But I think the one thing that has been the most notable, and I think he would say this, and I know my wife and I have been talking about it, is the lack of contact with his friends. All of us are obviously probably on some level dealing with that. But thinking back to when I was a 15-year-old, the idea of being trapped at home alone with my parents for 2 months with no end in sight is a complete nightmare. Again, I think he's done a really great job of hanging in there, but he really, truly, deeply misses his friend. And my wife and I have been really struggling around wanting to maintain a real clear boundary around him not having access to his friends. That's kind of the line that we've taken. We don't connect in person with our friends. We've kind of all made a pact to do that. But it's been really tough for us to kind of draw that line and knowing how important this is. And, the more I've been thinking about it, the more I kind of realize that at that age, friendships are so core to what we end up becoming. It kind of sets the tone for all of our relationships as an adult. It really helps us define who we are and who we become. And obviously he has a relationship with us, but this is the time in his life when he's supposed to be separating and going off on his own and finding his own identity and trying on all different kinds of identities. And, I feel sad that he has not been able to have that, and we don't know how long that will go on. But to kind of connect it to the work that we do, recently, well, about a year ago, Youth Services went through this process, and we came up with a set of a new mission and a new vision and a set of core values, which is new for the agency. And at the end, I'm actually going to share that briefly with everyone. But one of the key core values we came up with, and it's actually become our tagline, is relationships are the intervention. And what that means for the agency is that really, when we looked at all the work that we do across the entire agency, the relationships that we have with the clients is key to the work that we do. It's the real linchpin. And the more I think about it, particularly, and we don't work exclusively with youth in our agency, but that's our main, the main thing. It's in our name. It is particularly key in that teen, young adult age, which is the age that when we talk about youth, that's mostly who we're working with. And that it's obviously a developmental stage, the relationships that, the deep relationships that youth have with their friends, but it's also, like I was saying earlier, really does set you up for how you're going to be as an adult. And I think at Youth Services, we really look at that as being a therapeutic tool really consciously utilizing our relationship with the folks that we work with. And the more that we've delved into that core value as an agency, the more that we've really seen that that is the core heartbeat of the work that we do. So I'll come back to that a little bit, but really what I want to do over the next few minutes is just kind of give you a sense of how we've responded to the pandemic and how we anticipate moving forward. And I'm going to kind of break it up into 3 sections. The first section will be just talking about how we initially responded to COVID-19. Then I want to talk a little bit about the next stage, which is kind of where we're at now, like what are we going to do next from where we're at in this moment, and then thinking a little bit about the longer term future. So as far as how we initially responded to the pandemic, I would say that I am really pleased at how quickly everyone kind of fell into lockstep and made a transition to remote work. Right now, other than a few people working in the offices in a very limited basis, and usually one at a time, and an occasional need for us to give something to a client, we're doing all remote work. And that's what we've been doing for 2 months. All of our staff made that transition well. We're actually an agency that uses a lot of laptops. So that was a really easy transition. People didn't have to bring home desktops. And as far as clients go, we immediately within the first couple of days were able to reach out to all of our clients, get them connected if they didn't have the ability to connect with us through technology. And most of our clients have been able to make that transition to us being able to see them virtually. Obviously, there's something lost in not being able to see people in person, and we're really paying attention to that. But as far as the core piece of our work and being able to serve the clients in the way that we do, we've been able to make that switch, at least for the short term. One of the things I wanted to highlight, we have 2 programs that do a lot of group work, which is probably the hardest thing to transition to. We have a program in Bellows Falls called Friends for Change, which does after-school programming in Bellows Falls. And then we have Demographics, which is our youth-led screen printing business. It's a workforce development program. And both of those are programs that are predominantly done with large groups, relatively large groups of youth. And interestingly, that was the group that made the transition the quickest. So the staff for those teams immediately switched all those youth over to doing virtual work. And they were really creative about it. So within 2 days, both of those teams, because they tend to work together, and they have had all the youth kind of work all in the same group together. They immediately moved to doing virtual game nights within the first couple of days. They did virtual movie nights. I think they were doing that whole thing. Netflix has that ability to watch a movie together, and there's like a chat on the side. And so they switched over to doing that. They created homework clubs online. Michaela Stockwell she likes to walk, so she got everybody to do virtual walks together where everyone's holding up a video and kind of all walking, separately, but being able to see each other over the screen. And they've been able to build some what we're calling community building circles that have come out of this. Youth can be mercurial. Youth can not like change a lot. Youth don't always go the direction that adults kind of suggest for them. But in this case, it's all flowed really well. And almost all the youth who have engaged in that program are still working and meeting and coming to those meetings. They're finding to be really, really valuable. So I think that's really great. The other thing I wanted to tell you about in regard to the clients we work with is that we have 2 housing programs that are really crucial particularly in this period of time. We have our transitional living program, which is a apartment that we rent, and one in Bellows Falls, one in Brattleboro. And it's basically a 6 to 9 month program for youth as they're transitioning from homelessness to being in an apartment on their own. It's not an emergency shelter. Usually it's youth that we're working with, and then we have them go there. They learn skills, they learn to work together. It's congregate atmosphere. There's a bunch of youth in there at once. And when the pandemic started to hit, we had openings in some of our programs. The other one is a brand new, we got some funding from Housing Urban Development, and it's called transitional housing. It's somewhat similar, but they're standalone apartments. And when youth are in there and they have case management for a period of time, they're able to stay in that apartment and get a housing voucher, and then they take over the rent. And we had openings in that program. That was a brand new program, and we had not quite opened it up. But when we saw that this pandemic was starting to hit the United States, and we kind of anticipated that there might be quarantines coming, we immediately moved to fill the transitional housing units as quickly as possible. And David Brown, who's on the call here, helped us get our Brattleboro apartment up and going. And we circumvented part of our process to get some homeless youth who are out in the community into our transitional living program. So that all flowed really relatively smoothly. The other things I'll just say about kind of what's happened in this transition, some of our staff have seen a decrease in work. So we've been reaching out to other agencies to kind of help with other pressure points that are going on. Groundworks, who is the homeless agency in town, they part of the process of getting someone into a shelter, into an apartment or into the shelter, is they have to go through this assessment, and there's a big backlog of those. And so one of our staff people who has had less of a caseload and had free time, she volunteered, and we had her pick up some of the assessments there, and she's been ripping through them really quickly, and been really helpful. And the other thing I thought I would share is that, it's been tough for everyone on our staff and for clients, but we've really tried amongst the staff to provide as much opportunity for folks to feel supported and to connect. And a lot of our meetings, particularly in the beginning, were a lot of just people sharing how they were feeling and what they were struggling with, even outside the perimeter of the work. Try to bring in a little levity. In the first couple of weeks, we started this email chain where everyone was sharing their new office, which was basically photographs of their workspace at home. I shaved my face the last week, and in the process, my family asked me to do this. I tried shaving and leaving a big bushy mustache. So I took a photo of that and shared it with staff, and then I cut that back and had a pencil mustache. I shared that with staff, and we had this whole kind of email conversation that ended with me pretending that sending a picture of Brad Pitt with a beard, because people couldn't remember what I looked like. So I shared that and told them, remember, this is what I look like. So anyway, that there's been some fun and levity in there. So the next thing I thought I would just talk about is what in the agency where someone has dubbed the middle times, which would be the next stage. Like, what does it look like for us to start to open up again? More and kind of step back from remote work. And one of the things that we've done is kind of surveyed the staff around what we're imagining the impacts on youth are going to be, so we can kind of anticipate what work we may need to be doing with youth. And so we have I have a list of like 6 or 7 things that came out of that. And so what we're imagining the impact on youth that we're going to need to be paying attention to is continued social and emotional support, continued need for therapy, particularly related to trauma, anxiety, and depression. So, a lot of the youth that we work with are already struggling with trauma, and dealing with anxiety and depression. This has only heightened it, obviously. So a real need for us to continue to do that. We are really trying to build our toolbox so that we can work to continue to offer skill building to help manage symptoms related to trauma, and anxiety and depression. We're keeping a close eye on the impact of substance abuse. We have clients who are in recovery or have been struggling with substance abuse, and trying to keep an eye on that and how that's going. So I think there's probably going to be, in the community in general, I think there's probably going to be a noted increase in relapse or an increase in use. There's been a lot of talk in the community, and we've seen this a real need for access to food and supplies and resources. So we want to stay on top of that. Um, and we want to give youth spaces to process their isolation or loss related to COVID-19. We're really looking at additional support and advocacy around education. I know even amongst my son and his friends, um, it's a huge shift. I'm really going to be curious to see what the impact, when we look back on this generation of youth who are in school right now, and what the impact on their education is going to be, having lost even just a semester. And even though I think schools have tried to do their best to move to online learning, it's different. I mean, I'm sure anybody who's a parent here, it is really different. Um, and so, and for youth like ours, who a lot of them are disenfranchised and um, you know, struggle with a lot of things connected to the system, we really want to be able to advocate for them that they don't, that when we get back into being in school, or even in the short term, that they don't lose the opportunities that maybe youth who are more enfranchised have adults who are able to help them advocate for their needs. We want to make sure that we can be a voice for them so that they don't get lost even further around education. And then the last thing is really keeping an eye on housing, employment, and transportation for the youth that we work with. Um, and then the last thing around this middle period is just what we're doing as an agency. So with our staff. So I'm really committed to the safety of our clients, to our staff, and also just to the general public health safety in the community. What the decisions we're going to be making are going to be made on by reviewing state guidance from our funders, staff input, and really focused on thoughtful science-based facts. I highlight that, like science-based facts. And what I've started telling people is that I would rather be wrong about opening late or later than anyone else than being wrong about opening too early. I think that there's a higher risk, obviously, from that. So, and I think the other thing is that I've told staff that we should be prepared to be, that the default will be remote work for probably a long time. And while we might be able to come back into the office to some degree, and we'll need to do some one-on-one in-person work, that you know, probably until there's a vaccine or some type of cure, that I'm going to want people to work at home as much as possible. I think that's going to be the safer thing. So that's kind of the middle ground, where the middle times, as people have been saying. So the last thing I want to just update people on, and this is probably got the least details because it's the furthest out, is just I want to be prepared as an agency for the future impact. You know, what's going to happen systemically, both positive and negative, to the pandemic, and what's going to be the economic impact of all this. And I think we need to be really preparing for the worst and hoping for the best. I've long been a real proponent of, and I've talked a lot as an executive director at Youth Services, that nonprofits these days need to be flexible and adaptable, and that is at all levels. And we've made some real strides in doing that. But I think there's another piece of work that we need to do to really be prepared for the potential changes that might come our way. I think the way we've transitioned to remote work is a testament to the amount of work that we've done. But you know, I think, you know, funding cuts, you know, changes in community need. I think we need to be really ready to pivot really quickly, and so we're going to be taking some steps particularly over the next few months to do that. And what I feel really great about is that we did do this piece of work where we have a new mission, vision, and really the thing I'm most excited about is our set of core values. So before I wrap this up and I talk about that, I'm going to take a bit of a experiment here. I have yet to do this. I want to share my screen with you and just quickly introduce you to, if you haven't seen it, our mission, vision, and our core values. So let's see. Where do I share my screen? Here we go. All right, fingers crossed. Let's hope this works. And I don't end up showing you my Facebook page or something like that. Let's see. That's me. Share screen. All right. Are you able to see the screen? Does it say Youth Services Mission, Vision, Core Values? Okay, I see some thumbs up. All right. So I'm not going to walk you through each of this, but I thought I'd just give you a quick glance. So we've our mission is now working together to build resilience and be a catalyst for change. Uh, there's our tagline, mission, relationships are the intervention. But I think particularly when it comes to really thinking about the changes we're going to be needing to make, obviously they all have to be mission centric. But what I really like about having a set of core values is that I think this is like the next step of how to operationalize that mission. And I think it'll really connect to the changes we need to make. And so I'm just going to name the names and I'll give you like a few seconds to read the details after them. But our core values that we all share in our agency, Youth Services shares, are relationship, respect, justice, wisdom, awareness, efficacy, responsibility, equity, and integrity. All right. I am going to stop sharing now. And then I'm going to unmute you all. Before I unmute you all, first of all, I'm going to see if there's any no questions in the chat. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'll open it up for any questions that anyone has. And if you could raise your hand, then I'll call on you if you have any questions. So, all right, I am unmuting you all. All right, you can self-mute if you want. Yeah, are there any questions? And it doesn't have to be about anything I necessarily said. It could be just questions about the work we do, or even comments or reflections on what you're seeing in the community.
I have a question.
Yes.
So
Lisa.
Hi.
Hi.
I was wondering how many youth you serve in some of those programs. So for
Sure.
the homework club, I was hearing, and maybe the other ones, the after school program, I think.
Yeah, Friends for Change. Yeah, and Friends for Change actually I think I talked to you about this, Lisa, at one point, but that was an offshoot of the Boys and Girls Club. Used to have a have a club up in Bellows Falls, yeah, and then after you all had to make some choices and focus on Brattleboro, that group ended up coalescing and they created Friends for Change, and so it kind of comes out of the work of the Boys and Girls Club. It's really great. So the Friends for Change group up in Bellows Falls, I think we have somewhere between 25 and 30 active members. So, and my understanding is that there's probably, like right now, probably 20 to 25 that are kind of actively involved with our virtual stuff. And demographics, probably at this point, when we first started, we had a flood of youth. I mean, similar, I think we had like 30 or 35. I think now we have a kind of a core group of about 15 to 20 that are connected in some way to demographics. And as you and I have talked about, a number of our demographics youth are also part of the Boys and Girls Club. And we've been talking a little bit about collaborating and partnering around that particular program. So kind of picking up on where the youth are already collaborating or being involved in both agencies. So,
right.
Yeah.
So, thanks.
Sure. Any other question? Tim, are you waving to me, Tim? You're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yep. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, you mentioned
now I can't hear.
Received some additional funding, correct?
Yep. I didn't hear the first part. Yeah.
Well, you mentioned that you had gotten some additional funds for some activity, and then, but then just at the end here, you said you guys were facing some real funding constraints, and I was wondering about that because a lot of agencies have been able to get additional resources because of COVID through the government or foundations or other organizations. Have you been able to tap into that, and how are you gonna finance all these what sound like really great additions to or expansions of your programs?
Yeah. Thanks, Tim. I'm glad you asked that, because I definitely want to be clear. So we actually haven't really seen any cuts in funding, but let me circle back to that. So the program I talked about is called the Youth Homeless Demonstration Project. And 2 years ago, we were part of a statewide group that were looking at youth homelessness in Vermont. And we made an application um, to HUD, and we're able, and the whole state got some funding to pilot some various programs, including the one I talked about, the transitional housing that ends with a voucher. The other brag I'll put into that is that the great thing about that project was they actually brought a lot of current and former homeless and runaway youth to be part of that gathering the information. And there was a group, perhaps 6 youth, who were really involved pretty heavily in that. And half the youth were youth services involved youth. They were really, really committed to it. And there has been some funding that has come along. Some of like the transitional living program, we just found out that we got an additional $15,000 that we can use for a year that can help do some additional work with, particularly with the youth around COVID. And there have been some other smaller chunks of funding that have been coming along. And I think there may be some others. The CARES Act has put
Right.
money into the state, and then the state is figuring out how to disperse various pots of funding. So yeah, I mean, hopefully we'll, appropriately, I mean, there's a lot of need out there, and we, only have a certain segment of the high needs in the area. So hopefully appropriately we'll have access to that funding. What I'm more anticipating is that, and we're already starting to see some of this, we're hearing from some conversations around the state that even for the next fiscal year, they're starting to talk about cuts. And so I think we've gotten some funding that'll help us for this fiscal year. We're hoping some of that will roll into the next fiscal year. Maybe there'll be some state or federal cuts that'll come out of that. I'm really concerned about our fiscal year is July through June, fiscal year 2022. Because at some point, the federal government and the state government will have to stop, or I don't know if they have to, but I anticipate that they'll probably stop giving funding for this particular epidemic. And then there's going to be so how do we make up this funding? And I'm hoping they don't move to an austere reaction and have to cut things inappropriately. So, I'm also curious to see how the stock market does in the long term. I mean, it's doing fairly well now, which feels odd, but it is doing well. So that's good news for people who don't, some folks who donate for us. So that's good. So I just want to be prepared. That's more what I was talking about, more in the long term.
Good, thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions? I thought I saw our hand up. Yes, Susie.
So, our minds here in the house are looking towards the end of the school year, which all of a sudden is right around the corner. And I was thinking of that in terms of youth services. And I think it's often already a time of transition, but a lot of families are under stress. And I wonder about new people, new youth who are now going to be struggling with housing and food insecurity, who would maybe in the school system, they may be more easily identified in how things were before, and you may get a referral. What are you all thinking about for how to reach potential new clients who are, and I think there are probably going to be a lot of them who are struggling and could really benefit, but can't walk through the front door right now? How might that work?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, actually, this would be an interesting thing for us to kind of look at, so I could share some real data, like specific numbers with you. But I would say that interestingly, most of the clients that come to us don't come through the school system, actually. Or if they come through the school system, it's through another conduit. So they get highlighted and by the Department of Children and Families, and then they come to us through that. Most of the youth that get referred to us come through, if it's having to do with homelessness, they come through our housing partners in the community. At DCF, we have a number of clients that come that way. But our main referral source still to this day are other youth. So youth find out, and they have I'm assuming that they have a good experience with us, and then they have a friend who's struggling similarly, and then they say, here, call this person. In fact, I was just talking with our clinical director, Heather, earlier today, and while we were talking, the phone rang. And at the end of the phone, at the end of our conversation, she checked her phone and found out that the person who called her was the friend of a former client for another staff person. And somehow this client had found her number, which isn't a number that we publish in any way, but was just kind of reaching out and saying like, hey, I need some help. So, I mean, that's kind of like the ongoing way that we get referrals. I think one of the things, the other place I think that we are going to be able to be more on the radar for folks is it's been interesting. I think of Brattleboro as a community that has a pretty tight-knit human service community, and there are lots, tons and tons of different forums where people get together and talk about different factors and different facets of this. But it's been interesting to really see how that has reconfigured itself amongst the human service agencies. And so I'm at different tables and our staff are at different virtual tables. And I have already seen that there's been a lot more attention paid to the youth who might drop off the map. And so making sure that we're at those tables and that people know that we can be seen there. But I definitely would be open to, hearing from anyone either now or in the future if they feel like there are conversations going on, or there's a particular person at the school that they feel like we should be in contact with. Please let us know. We've been able to maintain, we haven't stopped taking clients, and we have the ability to take on more clients. And so there's no pause for us to be able to keep the doors open and connect with those who might know of a youth or a family that are struggling.
I have a question.
Yep.
So I guess besides the transitional programs and housing that seems like high school age kids and up.
Yeah, and young adults up to like 23. Yeah.
Young adults. I mean, do you have any other programming for high school kids during this time, or have you developed any, or have you been thinking about that as we go into the summer or into the fall, or they also come out of isolation, like your own son?
Yeah.
In isolation.
Yeah.
I'm just curious, how do you target that group in any other way?
Yeah, no, not anything specific, not anything outside of what we're already providing for services and trying to fill in gaps for the youth that we work with. So yeah, we haven't added anything in particular at this point. Actually, honestly, like if some of that came up, I would probably call you, Lisa, and try to talk about like where could we collaborate around that, or what are you? I know what you are what the Boys and Girls Club is going to be trying to open. So I'd love to make sure that we're working on that together.
Yeah, I just think it's an interesting conversation to have, because I think that is a group that doesn't have a lot of focus right now.
Yeah.
Especially virtually.
Yeah. Well, one thing I would say, and I know this isn't a conversation just between you and me, Lisa, but was that if you get to the point where your staff are trying to reach out to the youth more, reaching out to the youth, and
our staff are even back at the club.
Yeah.
Right.
But if you want to, I would love to, and you're thinking about maybe doing some virtual stuff the way that we're doing it. I think our staff would be really interested in connecting with your staff around what we've done, and then you could take that and do whatever you wanted with it. But so let me know. I definitely, or you and I will talk at some point.
I will.
Anyway,
but, I mean, there are some discussions to have, so I would be happy to have those.
And we'll have them, I'm sure.
Yeah. We'll keep talking.
Yeah, that's right. Great. Are there any other questions that anyone has?
Well, I could give you one more alert if you want.
Oh,
Russell.
please, yes. No more alerts. No more. No, go for it.
Well, not that kind.
Okay.
You already tap into the Brattleboro Area Affordable Housing Creative Community Housing Program.
Yep.
And we just got awarded additional money to double our budget for this year through the
Wow.
Thompson Trust,
That's
which
great.
I think has helped fund you for various activities as well.
Yep.
So you can alert your people that our intention and the reason we asked for that money was so that we would be available to help people with housing issues.
Mm.
And so I don't know who your point person is for that, but you can alert them that we're ready to go great guns, because we were able to increase our allocation for that to 30,000 for the year,
Wow.
for the rest of the year. So
That's
that's
great.
just something to know about.
That's great. And that's such a great pot of money that, that you all oversee. I think it really fits a need. There's a lot of gaps that I know that fills. I'll let Christine Lynn, our Director of Youth Development, she oversees our homeless runaway programs. I'll let her know. So,
Great.
Thanks.
Great.
Thanks. Any other last questions or comments? I know that I wanted to give the floor to Anna for a second. I don't know if you had a comment or a question, but I know you wanted to say something.
Just a quick comment for you, Russell. I had to leave the board meeting Zoom early yesterday because I had another meeting, and I had meant to say to you in that context, and I'll say it now, that from the perspective of a board member, I could not be more impressed with how the staff under your leadership has in fact pivoted on a dime and continued this work. And as I was thinking about that, I realized I'm not just so impressed with you guys, but also with the whole youth services community, which includes our donors. Because people have in fact stepped up and said, how can we help? This is hard. Your work is more important than ever. And how can we help? And that's been hugely important in a time when we can't do our normal fundraising. So I'm so grateful for you, for the staff, and for everybody who has stepped up. It's been great. And that's all I wanted to say, just to thank you.
Great. Thanks, Anna. I really appreciate it. Yeah. All right. Well, if that is, I guess I'll say that is that. So I really appreciate all of you coming out. Yeah. And spending some time with with me here. And please feel free to reach out in any way, questions, comments, issues you're seeing pop up. You can reach out to me directly, or, anyone on the board or staff. So great. Thank you all. I hope you all stay safe and healthy. Yeah. Thank you. And great. Have a great evening.
Nice seeing a lot of people again.
Good night, everybody.
Thanks, Russell.
Good evening.
Bye. Thanks.
Everyone.
Time to fix dinner.